It's time for the double stop with Brian Sword.
I grew up in St. Catharines, Ontario, which is, I don't know if you know where that is. It's a small city near Niagara Falls, Ontario, and in southern Ontario. And music in my family was probably more on my father's side. My dad was a doctor, but he was also a classical pianist, piano player. And he was quite good. And he would come home every night. We had a beautiful grand piano in the house, and every night he'd come home from being a doctor, and just to wind down, he'd get on his piano and play Beethoven and Chopin, and that's how I guess that was my first introduction to music. A lot of classical when we were kids, so it was quite nice.
And when did you get your first guitar?
I started on piano was my first instrument, and started lessons on that when I was 5. So it was pretty strict, with all the kids being in piano. There's 4 kids in my family, all had to take lessons. So I took piano up till about the age of 11, and I kind of enjoyed that. But when I discovered rock and roll and the electric guitar, when I saw an electric guitar, and I just decided that, you can't jump around with a piano. So I was just infatuated with guitar. So I asked my dad if I kept up my piano lessons, could I start some guitar lessons? And we kind of made a deal, and got me a guitar when I was 11. Yeah, I got a crappy acoustic and started some lessons.
And did you find the piano background, did that help you when you started learning guitar, or was it completely different?
No, I totally benefited from learning piano because it's such a standard instrument for everything else. You learn to read music, and you know the keyboard, and you know chords and theory and everything else. So picking up the guitar was so much easier for me because I already knew how to read music. So it was a great background. It's totally beneficial. And now, these many years later, I enjoy playing piano, keyboards just as much as guitar. I do a lot of writing, so I'm glad I learned both instruments.
Now, when you started playing the guitar, was it more of a class? Did you continue with the classical, or did you jump right into Beatles or whatever else you were inspired by?
No, it was rock and roll with the guitar. My dad, like I told you earlier, my dad was a doctor, and he had a friend who was a doctor, but he was kind of a hippie doctor, like a cool rock and roll doctor, and he set me up. My first lessons with him, and I'll never forget him, was the coolest guy, and he taught me to play stuff like House of the Rising Sun and late 60s, early 70s rock stuff, and that's the way I wanted to go.
And so was he, since you already had a theory background, was it simply he was teaching you songs just to scratch the itch right away?
Yeah. I wasn't doing anything classical on guitar, and I started to, the first few years of lessons were trying to read tab and some music, and the boring guitar lessons before I got the cool doctor guy. I should say I had other lessons before, and it's kind of boring, but then he started to teach me rock and roll, and in rock and roll, you don't really read music. It's more feel. You just learn the chords, and it's all by sight. And then it started to get fun once you started to learn those songs.
And what were your primary influences?
When I first started playing, I think I remember walking through a Kmart one day, and I walked by the record department, I'll never forget, and they were playing Smoke in the Water by Deep Purple. That Machine Head had just come out, and I kind of was walking by, and I said, what is that riff, man? It's the coolest thing I've ever heard. So from then on, I was a Deep Purple, Ritchie Blackmore freak, loved Led Zeppelin, early Alice Cooper and Santana, bands like that. Got pretty heavily into some prog rock too, like Kansas, Genesis, all that stuff.
And then what were your first bands?
I guess my first just basement bands with some guys from high school, just messing around and playing songs, just trying to learn how to play in a band with a bass player and a drummer. But I think the first serious band that I actually got together and we went out and performed was a local band called Stitch, and it was a 4-piece band. And it was a cover band, but we actually got good enough to get gigs, and we started playing bars when I was like 17. So it was pretty cool. We felt pretty grown up going out and actually getting paid for playing around the area, you know?
So that was all around St. Catharines, or did you go into Toronto?
Well, we started out in St. Catharines with that band, and then we might get a gig maybe, an hour away, and then we started to get gigs a little bit farther away. And eventually winding up in the old Northern Ontario circuit, which back in the 70s and 80s, if you were a cover band, you'd do these things called six-nighters. And you'd go up to God knows where, some Northern Ontario town and some hotel, and you'd play there all week from Monday to Saturday. And you'd live in the hotel. But, it was a great way to cut your teeth and get your band together and just be a band and learn how to play. And when you're a kid, when you're like 18 or 19 or in your early 20s, you're just having fun. You got you don't have a family or a mortgage or anything. You're just learning to be a musician, and it's fun. It was fun, a great way to learn.
You do that for a few years, and then is that when you hooked up with Honeymoon Suite, or was there more bands in between?
No, what happened was that was my band that I did right after high school, and I think I did that for a year after high school. Just went on the road in Northern Ontario and realized this was fun, but it's really not going to go anywhere, because I was always looking ahead to being. All I wanted to do was write songs and be in a band that did original music and made records. I wanted that more than anything. So I quit that and went to London, Ontario, to a college down there called Fanshawe, and they had a recording course there. So I thought that was pretty cool, and it kept my parents happy that I was going back to school, and it kept me happy because I was going to a recording or a music school. So it was a win-win situation. I went to Fanshawe, and I went there for about 2.5 years, and that was one of the best things I ever did. It was so much fun. I learned how to work in a studio, learned how to twiddle the knobs, and I learned how to write better songs. I actually wrote New Girl Now when I was in college and did an early demo of it there. So I did a couple of years in Fanshawe, and after I finished there, I moved from London back up to Toronto to look for a band. And at that point, I was in a new wave band called Steve Blimke and the Reason, which it was a band that we formed in college. New wave was really big, so I joined that band because they were making records, and they asked me to join. It was a chance for me to go to record on their album, and I thought that was the coolest thing, just to get in a band that had an album out. So I did that, played with them for a couple of years, and we toured Canada. We opened for XTC and a few other bands, and it's like, wow, I felt like a rock star because I was playing bigger venues and theaters, being an opening act. But to me, that was miles ahead of being in a cover band in Timmins, So that eventually went by the wayside. And here I was in Toronto a couple of years after college, flat broke and looking for a gig. So at that point, I had called a booking agent named Steve Prendergast, who used to book me in the Blimke band. I called him up one day. I said, I'm out of a band. I'm out of a gig. Have you got a band or anybody, man? Cover band, I don't care. I need to eat. Is there somebody looking for a guitar player? And he hooked me up with a guy named Johnny D, who had started this band called Honeymoon Suite with a bunch of other guys. And they were a cover band at first. And his guitar player just quit. So he calls me up. He says, listen, I got this Johnny. He's a pretty good singer. He needs a guitar player. Why don't you guys get together and meet? So we did.
And what was the first impression like?
It's funny because Johnny is from Niagara Falls, the same area that I grew up in. But me and him, played in different bands. We never actually met when we were living down in the peninsula. We only met when we lived up in Toronto. And Johnny was just a cocky, young Italian, singer guy. And he had an attitude, and he was a good-looking guy. And I liked him because he had that, he had that singer cockiness going on. And when he opened his mouth to sing, it's like, that's it. The light bulb went off for me, because I knew that in every great band that I used to like, there's always a core. There's always a guitar player and a singer, or 2 or 3 guys that a core of that band. It's usually the singer and one other guy. And when I heard Johnny sing, and then I gave him some of my originals, and he sang New Girl Now, it's like, bing, the light bulb went off for me. And I said, this is something, I know we can make something out of this. So it was one of those, moments.
So you find your singer and you join the band. Was there any contract yet?
No, man. Like at first, Johnny was as broke as I was. And the only thing we were thinking of at that time was I would join the band, learn the cover songs, and go back up to Northern Ontario to play and just, make our $200 each and play so we could eat. And we were so broke that we all moved into the same house. There's 3 or 4 of us living in the same house in Toronto. But, back then, that was fine. It was the rock and roll life. I have such great memories of that. I'd say first 2 years that I was in Honeymoon Suite, we were a cover band because we just had to get our act together. And what we would do is play the covers, but we would learn a few originals like New Girl Now and maybe Burning in Love. And we would sneak them into the set later on at night so the club owner wouldn't really care. And that's how we started to get the original thing going. And then following that, what the real turning point for us was that this radio station in Toronto called Q107 would have this homegrown contest every year. And at the urging of our manager, he said, you guys have to record a couple of your originals and send them in. You have nothing to lose. So we did. We drove back all night after a gig in Sudbury or something. We went into a guy's studio on Sunday, and we cut New Girl Now and Funny Business and I think one other track just on an 8-track demo. And then that was on Sunday. Then Monday we split and went back to some other place. Entered the demo for New Girl, and long story short, it won.
Now, in terms of the other bands in that competition, I remember those contests with Q107, and were the other bands kind of on equal footing, or did you guys come out of nowhere to win that?
I don't know. It was a real, if you listen to a homegrown album or the year that we won, which I think was 1982 or 83, the album is a real mix of some kind of, melodic rock bands and some singers. And I think we were all probably on equal footing, but each band was so different. But we just had something. People just liked the song. They liked Johnny's voice, and it was a real rough demo, but there was just something there that appealed to people. And it got, who knows, if I knew what it was, it's just an appeal thing. They played it on the radio and the phones lit up and people requested it because there was something there that appealed to people.
And what did winning that contest do for you? What was the next day like? How did it change things?
It caused it caused a lot of interest in the Toronto area, because from the time that I joined Honeymoon Suite, Johnny and we kind of had our vision to make this into more than a cover band. We were going to go and we were going to get a record deal and we're going to cut an album if it takes us 5 years to do it. That's, we had a goal in mind. So after the Q107 thing, what it did was it got us on the radio. And when that happens, the record company started to take notice. And we had a manager with the savvy to kind of build it up and make the calls. And we got the labels started to come out to the shows because of Q107, because of the radio thing that can do so much for you. Because all of a sudden, to the labels, when they see something happening on the radio and bands calling in, they know there might be something there. So they came out, and after a few showcases, WEA, as it was called back then, which is Warner Music now, WEA stepped up to the table. We got several offers, but WEA had the best one, and we signed with them, like not long after. It was amazing.
Now, did you already have a collection of songs already written, or did you have to start writing to make the record?
A bit of both. I would always be writing because I was hoping and praying that this would happen. So I had New Girl Now, I had Face to Face, Funny Business, Burning in Love. And it kind of looked like, as I started to see things going the way of, well, maybe things are gonna step up here, and we just might get a record deal. I knew as the main writer that I better kick it into high gear and start writing. So I would take any time I had on the road back in my room, or during the days of boredom, I would sit in my room and I would write. And I remember writing Stay in the Light in Sault Ste. Marie. And I wrote What Does It Take? And I think in Windsor I wrote that. It's funny, I can remember the cities that I wrote these songs in. But to answer your question, yeah, I had a backlog of a lot of ideas because at that point I was so motivated. I was so jazzed that things were just coming out of me, and I was writing as many songs as I could because I knew soon that we're going to need them.
And how was the recording process for that album?
It was fun. It was the classic example of a young band that gets their first record deal, and they cut their first record for, I think we made the first album for like $60,000, and we recorded it in 2 weeks with overdubs and everything. Because being a bar band, you're just used to working really fast because you're under those constraints. But the first album has that energy to it. So it was fun to get in the studio. I was no stranger to the studio because I'd gone to school for it. So I already had kind of a sense of how to work in a studio. But some of the guys were a little bit newer to it. But it's like trial by fire. You just learn fast. But you know what? We were a good band because we went out there for 2 years, these guys, and we played every night. And nothing makes a band more than that, than actually getting out on the road and eating the crappy food and playing the late nights. But it makes you a good band. So by the time we got in the studio, I think we were good players.
That album, I recall when it came out, and there was a bunch of hits on it, but I don't recall how quickly it became a hit. Was it a slow build when the album came out, or did it hit? And I think that probably times pretty well with the beginning of Much Music. And what was the process there?
If I recall, it was a long time ago, but I think that it happened really fast. When New Girl Now came out, I think it was an instant hit, and the record started selling. And you're right, the Much Music thing, the timing couldn't have been better because video was in its infancy. And we all realized how important video was. Much Music was just starting out, so it was a perfect situation to be in. And the labels were all about spending the money on videos because they saw how it would sell records. So New Girl Now came out, we did a video. Then we did Burning in Love, did a video. Way Babies came out, we did a video. Stay in the Light came out. I think we got 4 singles off that album. It's just like one after the other. And subsequently, it just starts selling and selling. And then we get our gold record and then a platinum record. It happened pretty quick. It was cool.
And how old would you have been around that time?
I think it was 25 or 26.
So you're 25 or 26, and then you've been grinding it out for quite a few years. Then boom, you're in a huge band. How did that affect the dynamics within the band to all of a sudden be so popular?
We couldn't have been happy. You kidding me, man? Like we're doing 6-nighters in Northern Ontario, at one point. Then 6 months later, we have a record deal. We're on a tour bus and we're touring America, opening for Jethro Tull and Billy Idol and all these other bands. It's like night and day how fast it happened. And when you're a bunch of young guys in their early to mid 20s, it's just like kids in a candy store in terms of your rock and roll dreams are coming true. You're playing in arenas and people are giving you guitars and and all that stuff. But you know what? We realized that it's also a job, so we'd worked hard for it. So we were just happy to be there, and knew how lucky we were to actually get that break.
And how much touring did you do for that record?
Oh my God, like relentless. As much as they would keep us on the road for, we would go from one tour to the next tour. I think the first tour we did was like 3 months, opening for Jethro Tull, believe it or not, which is the oddest combination.
That is odd.
It is, but you know, this is management for you, and record labels. They're saying, well, you're going to open for Jethro Tull. You're going to go right through America, and we're like, okay, fine. It's a little odd, but it beats what we were doing before. But you know what? It actually turned out to be not bad. They were the coolest guys, and he got us on a bus, and it just all of a sudden we were in the States, which was a really cool thing too.
Now, for the big prize, again, did you have, when you jumped into the studio first, I want to know what kind of pressure you had, because I don't imagine anybody expected the success you had off the first one. It was probably a pretty big surprise. And two, did you write that record in the studio, or did you already have yet more of a collection of songs?
It was a bit of both. Polly did a lot of the writing when we were on the road with the first record, because I knew that the tour would end at one point, and then all of a sudden we'd have to come up with another batch of songs. So I tried to do as much writing on the road as I could, but it's always hard. So I think we finished the tour cycle for the first album, and then we took a little bit of time off. And fortunately, I had a lot of ideas going at that time. And also Ray Colburn, who was in the band at that time, was a great keyboard player, and he had a lot of great ideas too, as did Johnny. So we got off the road and just started pre-production. Everybody brought their ideas in, and Ray would bring in like Feel It Again, and I had What Does It Take, which I wrote a few years before. So it's like the old slogan you've got, saying that you've got 25 years to write your first record, and then you've got, a couple of months to write your second one. And with the success of the first one, there's the old sophomore jinx and all that. We knew the second album had to be way better than the first. So that pressure was on. But I guess, we pulled it together. And plus we had Bruce Fairbairn on board as producer and Bob Bach as an engineer, like a stellar team. We just got lucky, and the songs were there, and Bob and Bruce made them sound so good. Everything was just kind of coming together, we were lucky.
Feel It Again. Is that the one that had that crazy special effects video?
Yeah.
Tell me about that, because that's got to be, early green screen, because that video was crazy.
Well, it's like I said earlier that videos were in their infancy. It was a whole new genre coming out, and everybody was just trying to one up everybody else. And if one band had a video out that had special effects in it, then our manager would come to us and say, look, see what this band's doing. You've got to do that now, or you've got to do that one better. There was such a role going on with that to kind of keep up with the Joneses, or spend more money on your video than the other band. So the special effects thing, yeah, when you look back at it now, it's kind of looks pretty ancient, but at the time that was state of the art. And we flew to LA and shot it down there, spent way too much money on it. And Johnny was hanging from wires and kind of walking on a treadmill. He just hated it. He was so out of his element. But it's like, this is what you guys have to do, man, like to go to the next level. So we did.
And how was that record received when it came out? Did it match the success?
Oh yeah, it went. I remember the label guy coming, and like the day that it released, it went platinum. I think a day or two after it was released, he was freaking out. He says, your album is platinum on release, whatever, because we built up so much steam from the first record that the second one debuted like really high, if not number one in Canada. I don't know, but Warner's was ecstatic about it. And it was, looking back, that's like probably our best album. I love it in terms of how it sounds and everything else. It's a great record.
And at that point, when you went to tour it, were you still opening for other acts, or at that point did you start headlining?
At that point, we were now headlining in Canada, doing, the hockey arenas and whatever. In the States, we were headlining, but bigger tours. On the Big Prize, we went from one tour to the next to the next. We would start with Heart for like a couple months, and then we'd jump to ZZ Top, and then we'd jump to 38 Special. And in between, if there were days off, we'd go play like our own show in Dallas, or we'd play a theater. We were big enough that we could headline some small theaters in American cities. It was just relentless, and we just got the greatest tours to be on.
The next album was Ted Templeton, right?
Yeah.
How did you hook up with him?
We were on Warner Brothers in the U.S., and there was a point after the Big Prize was done when we'd come off the road and we were now starting to work on the third record. Ted was a fan of the band. And if I recall, Ted was head of A&R at Warner's. And he was also heavily involved with the motion picture side of things. And this soundtrack came across his desk for Lethal Weapon, the first Lethal Weapon movie, which nobody, it was just another cop movie. And they had a title track. We were in LA at the time working on some pre-production or something. And Ted got a song. Now, we didn't write the song Lethal Weapon, but he got a demo of it, and he was a fan of the band. And he said, he's a very smart guy. He said, this would be a great track for Honeymoon Suite. Like, this would suit Johnny's voice. So he sent a demo over. And Johnny listened to the demo. He goes, "Oh, I can't sing this. This is just not me." But Ted, urged him and encouraged him and brought him in the studio. Ted would be the kind of guy that would be very, very friendly, but at the same time, he would get what he wanted. And he convinced Johnny and the rest of us to record it. And I'm like, "Johnny, why not, man? It's for a film. What do we got to lose?" So he was right. And we cut it very quickly, and Johnny sang it. And so it was the Lethal Weapon thing that started it, and that working relationship we had that was our first time working with Ted. And for me, being a Van Halen fan, I couldn't believe that I was in the studio with the Ted Templeton. So it was a real thrill for me. So we cut Lethal Weapon, and from there we were working on the third album, writing songs. And unfortunately, we wanted Bruce Fairbairn he was our first choice for the third record, obviously, but he was right in the middle of the Bon Jovi record. So he was not available for a long time, and we needed to get things done. So Ted stepped up to the plate to produce the record. And at that point, it's like, that's awesome as well. So that's how that relationship got started. And from there, Ted started to work with us.
And what was the differences between those two producers? Such big names. How was working with them differently? Or the same?
Well, they are the same, they are different, but you're right, there's so many differences. I loved working with Bruce because Bruce came from a musician background. He was a player, a songwriter. That's where he started out, and he's such a musical guy. And he would, his first instinct is like, let's write the songs. And if you see anything that Bruce Fairbairn's done with Aerosmith or anybody else, he spends so much time making sure the songs are right and writing with the band, and that's really what's important. Long before you ever get to the studio, it's all about the songs. And Ted, on the other hand, is more like a fly by the seat of your pants. He's very instinctual, like his work with Van Halen. He's really got great instincts, and he just goes into things like totally based on feel. And he's at the same time, he's also a great song guy, working with Van Morrison and the Doobies and all the stuff that guy has done. So he's got a whole history of music in him as well. And actually he's a songwriter too. So they're just different. They're the same, but different.
Now, I recall that album doing really well in Canada when it came out. Was it the same in other territories?
No, it didn't. You know what? It didn't happen in the States for whatever reason. I think that it didn't have that big breakthrough song, and we wrote the best songs that we could at that time. But it happens, and at that point, we needed that. You give love a bad name. You needed that kind of song, which would broke it open for a band like Bon Jovi. And I believe that for whatever reason, the first single I think was "Love Changes Everything," and it did okay in the States, but it didn't break things wide open. And whose fault is that? I don't know. I did my best. I think everybody did their best, but that's the music business. You just put out the best record you can at that time and move on.
You guys, I think you took a break after that. What happened after that tour?
Oh man, I really have to go back to remember all this stuff.
Because I remember you had a best of back then, but it was a few years until Monsters Under the Bed, right?
Right. So we finished that tour, and then Warner's decided to exercise their first option. We signed with them, like with most bands, they always put an option in there for a greatest hits, which it's at the label's discretion. It wasn't our choice, but the label can say to you after 3 albums, hey, we want to do a greatest hits now, and you don't have any say in it. So now it's time to do a greatest hits, go back in the studio and cut 2 new songs to go on it. So that's what we did in the interim. We were in a state of changing because I think at that point, remember Ray Coburn left the band after the big prize. So we had another keyboard player, Rob Pruce, on Racing After Midnight. And then after Racing, things started to change. We had a lot of success, but with that came problems with management and burnout and, too much too fast. The same story that you hear with a lot of these bands. So Warner's put out a greatest hits, and we put out a song called Still Lovin' You on the singles record, a greatest hits, which was another hit in Canada, and we toured on that. And then I think Rob left the band, and we were down to 4 people, 4 of us. So things were changing into the early 90s.
And of course, the music scene was changing too.
Well, this is the thing. Like, we all know what happened in the early 90s is that Nirvana came along and Seattle, and it basically killed the melodic rock of the 80s. And you know what? That kind of thing happens because the music business goes in cycles. And I think in a way it was really good because it got rid of a lot of the bad, because you got to remember there was a lot of great bands in the 80s, but there was a lot of bad ones too. Well, there's a lot of bad music out there, and I think at one point they were giving record deals to everybody. So I think the good bands persevered through that, and the grunge thing really, it took down a lot of the 80s. It changed things. I think people were looking for a change, and that's the way it went. And man, that just, you either break up or you persevere through it. And you know what? We persevered right through that. It was tough, but we kind of kept going.
So after Monsters Under the Bed, what happened with the band? You kind of went away for a while, but did you break up or did you just kind of lay low?
No, we never broke up. At the core of it, Johnny and I have always been Honeymoon Suite. It was never a breakup. We would take long hiatuses because at one point there was simply no gigs there that made any sense for us. And we weren't going to just do anything just to get by because we had a fan base, and it was better just to stay away than to go out there and put a band out there that's not even close to what the band was before. So we always held our heads up and kept writing music and did some other things till the time was right.
I think, if I recall correctly, it was around 2000 that I recall you guys started to play more shows. What was the response when you started picking it up again, leading to your first new record?
It was, one thing I can say is that we have a loyal fan base, and even when we were down, that if we would go out and do some clubs, the places would, for the most time, always be packed. And for a long time, we had different guys in the band. We had Johnny and myself with a different drummer and a bass player and a keyboard player. And it wasn't the most ideal lineup, but we always had good players that would play with us, because at the heart of it, we had such a great fan base that we'd built up with all these great songs, that these people still came out and supported us, and they wanted to hear New Girl Now and Burning in Love and Staying Light. So we would go out for several years doing that with what I call, I don't want to call it a sideman band, but these guys weren't original members, but it was still a really good band. So we did that for a number of years, and at the same time, always writing. And there was Monsters Under the Bed, which is the last record we did with Ray, and that, to me, I still say that is a great record. It's not the same as the other records from the 80s, but it's a more mature record, and there's some great stuff on that album. And then we did Lemon Tongue. For me, I liked going out and playing the old stuff, but as a writer, I've always got to have new things, even if you're playing one or two new songs in the show, because I don't want to rest on. I love the old hits, and that's what pays the bills. But the lifeblood of a band is to keep moving ahead and writing songs. So I always tried to do that. Then around, it's a while ago, 5-6 years ago, I said to Johnny, there's so many bands that are getting back together with original lineups, and I'm a big original lineup fan guy. So I said, what are we doing? Why don't we call Dave and Gary? Because we were all still friends. We just had not played together in a long time for, a lot of other reasons, which I don't even need to get into, but it wasn't a big blowout where we hated each other. It was just a different thing. So I called up Gary, and I called up Dave, and they were like, yeah, they hadn't, don't think Dave played with, I think he was out for like 15 years or something crazy like that. But they came back, and even Ray came back, and it was awesome.
And see, from a fan perspective, I'll speak from a fan perspective. From the outside, how it appears is that you guys rose up, you kind of weathered the storm of the 90s, and then you started building again around 2000, and it seemed like, and I'm speaking as a fan, so I'm putting myself, okay, well, I was in my early 30s at that point, and frankly, I was not interested yet in reminiscing about my youth, but you guys started building, and it seemed like you guys worked your asses off for about 10 years, and slowly rebuilt, and it also, I think it helped that your fans reached, okay, I'm 41 now, and you're damn right I want to go see Honeymoon Suite. Like, I want to go see Gowan. I want to go see these bands of, if Triumph were around, you're damn right I want to go see Triumph. So it hit that point, I think, that from what I'm seeing now, you guys are playing big shows again. In terms of you'll fill a theater instead of a bar. And It seems like you've worked very hard and gotten yourself back up to a point that it seems like things are going extraordinarily well. Is that a decent summary of what it's been like for the last 20 years?
Exactly. That hits the nail right on the head. I mean, there's been a resurgence, if you want to call it that, of melodic rock coming back. I think I was not a big fan of the 90s music. There's a lot of great music, but to me, being the type of writer I am, it was really dark and kind of depressing. There's some great guitar stuff, but I wasn't a fan, and I wasn't hearing guitar solos anymore. So once the grunge thing went away, I think people got tired of heroin songs and depressing songs, and they wanted to hear that melodic rock again. Because when you hear 80s rock, it's fun. It makes you feel good. It's great. So I think, and our fan base, of course, yeah, like you said, had gotten a lot older, not a lot older, and started to have kids that are getting into the band. So I think we've been riding that wave, because if you look out there, how many of these bands are back out there, and still touring? There's Night Ranger, Styx, Foreigner, Journey, even bands older than us. They're all out there touring constantly. And I think there's a demand for it because people just love that music. It stands the test of time. So what happened with us, I said, Johnny, let's get the original band back together, because to me, nothing sounds better than when the five of us play together. We've had sidemen, and it's good, but it's not the same. We know each other. There's this sound that we make. And when I get on stage, it makes me smile when Dave's playing drums and Gary's on bass. And I think the fans pick up on that because they can relate. It's the original members, but it's also a good band. Plus, we got a great, we finally found a great agent who understands what we're doing. And yeah, we have worked very hard in the last 10 years, and we've gone from one level to a much higher level in terms of the people, the kind of gigs we're doing. And it's been really good. And it's been the work that we put in. We're now doing festivals and fairs. And this summer, just this past summer, is probably it keeps getting better every year, but I cannot believe how many people we played to last summer, like tens of thousands of people over the summer. And I would say today, I can't believe how many people were out there tonight. And this didn't happen a while ago. And I think it's the hard work that we've put in, but it's also, we deliver a good show, and we've got a good reputation. I think people come back, and at the end of the day, we've got our fans to thank for it. They're still playing our music on the radio. So we're very grateful for what we have.
And this spring, you guys are representing Canada at the Monsters of Rock cruise.
Yeah.
I've been on the cruise twice. It's a riot.
Is it?
Oh yeah.
I've heard good things. This is our first one, and we're really looking forward to it.
I think the last time or two was Killer Dwarfs represented, but they always recognize, Monsters of Rock guys are pretty smart, and they recognize a lot of Canadians go down, so they always make a point of getting a rock solid Canadian band in there just to appease the Canadian fans.
Well, good. No, I love it, and I look at the lineup of bands, and I'm looking forward to it because there's a lot of great bands that I'm a fan of, and I'm looking forward to meeting some of these guys and hanging out. It'd be great.
When throughout this history of you, when does the Pepsi commercial play into it?
That was early on, man. That was like, I think around the first album, maybe, or second album. It's really hard to remember. It was way back, though. Again, it came through Warner Brothers in LA. And at that time, we were spending a lot of time down there. And I was going back and forth all the time for this and for that. And somebody got a call. Our manager got a call from Warner Brothers saying Pepsi is doing a commercial. And it's a rock and roll commercial. And the guitar track is already done, but they need a guitar player to come in and sing and play to this track and blow the tops off the pop bottles. They've auditioned a whole bunch of good-looking actors, but they put a guitar on them, and it doesn't look right because the guy's an actor who's pretending to play guitar, but he doesn't look like a guitar player. So Steve, who's our manager, he said, do you want to just for, like, we're going to be down there anyways. Do you want to go audition for this for, whatever? And I said, well, why not? So I did. And they put me in a room with like a tennis racket or something. It's not what you think it is. You go to this place, and they've got a little video camera there, and they play the track, and they said, okay, just air guitar to this. And I'm like, this is crazy. So I did, but anyways, I ended up getting it. And yeah. And by the way, Vinnie Moore was the guy who played guitar on that. I don't know. I think a lot of people think that I did, and I wish I did because the playing is awesome. But Vinnie did that track, and I don't know why they didn't use him, because I hung out with him when I was down there too, but didn't happen. He wasn't in the commercial, but he played on it.
Yeah, I've had him on the show, and he told his side of it too, which is fascinating. But he just said he was, he played it, but he was too young and was too kind of self-conscious, I think, to kind of give the performance they wanted in front of the cameras. So he didn't get that part of the gig.
Sure. Well, how these people, these film people, these commercial producers are. I mean, they're looking for one thing. They're looking for somebody just to ham it up. So who knows if you've ever gone to an audition for a movie or something, it's brutal. So you just go in there and do your thing, and you never know what's going to come out of it. But fortunately, I got it. So yeah, whatever. It was fun to do.
Did it help the band at all?
Man, when you're riding that wave like we were back then, it's just like one more thing to throw in there to promote, and it's like why not? I mean, it's Pepsi Cola and it's Derry in a Pepsi commercial. It just, the more you can do to up your profile and to get your name out there, man, like that's where I'm at with it. Just go with it.
I'm curious the evolution of you as a player. How do you see yourself now compared to yourself in the 80s as a player and as a writer? How do you think you've evolved?
I would like to think that I'm a better player now, a more schooled player than I was then. I still love playing the guitar as much as I did 20, 30 years ago. It's just infectious. I still want to get up in the morning and play. That never goes away. So I don't know. I'm really proud of a lot of the stuff I did back then, and I listened to some of the recordings that I did, and some I'm not crazy about, and other ones I'm like, yeah, that's not bad. And my whole thing is I'm really never satisfied totally. So I'm always trying to better myself, because there are so many great players out there. I'm just in awe of. I don't consider myself a great guitar player by any means. I just have to go on YouTube and listen to Joel Hoekstra or like Steve Stevens or Joe Satriani. These guys are amazing. But it gives me somebody to look up to, and it keeps me stimulated. There's so many good players out there. It just gets me going, and I try and vibe off of that and try and steal some licks,
And what's next for Honeymoon Suite? I saw some stuff on Facebook with you and Sean Kelly. You guys working on some new material?
We're so overdue, man. It's time. It really is. And the fans have been asking, and we put out Clifton Hill, I think 4 years ago, and it is definitely time. So Johnny and I have been working on songs. I've been writing. We've been working with Sean, and if we can, we're going to try and get something recorded this year, even if we put out a couple of new tracks on iTunes or maybe make an EP. But it's time for some new music, so we're looking forward to that, maybe within this year.